You filthy animals. How's my buddies over at the R2 Sonic Campfire doing today?
Never well. Keep them warm.
Oh, man.
You guys should come. You're my good luck charms, man. I always catch fish with you guys.
Is there room on the bus?
Because I look at you guys, and the 8 or 9 of you guys impressed me a lot. You know, because I first ran. Okay.
No, go on.
You guys.
I don't do advertising. You're not going to see me on billboards or in newspapers, classifieds, none of that. Well, yeah, there's that because, you guys are awesome. But
Yeah, well, that's comforting to know in case I say something stupid.
No, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You're hearing it real
That's
time.
kind of our thing, so don't step on our turf.
Yeah, come on, man.
Oh, man, I hope I don't.
What we're saying is actually news, so that's why we're fumbling a little bit, but it's going to sound amazing.
All right, welcome back. You are gathered around the Sonic Campfire with the Rutten River Pursuits podcast. This is Reality Outdoor Radio, where our mission is to get you into the outdoors by connecting you with the skills, people, and products you can trust.
Trust
them all.
I'm Steve.
It's Bucky.
This is Pick.
This is Dave.
And this week, we're back on the banks of Maryland, fishing for stripers. And this is about a year ago. We had Dave Sikorski from Maryland CCA on. And Dave's back with us. Dave.
How you guys doing?
Thank you.
Hey, Dave.
Thanks
for
for
joining
us.
us.
We're doing
Thanks for
great.
having me.
We're just going to dive right into this.
Can we say something now?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, we are not in our normal studio.
No.
We are at the Great American Outdoor Show.
Yes.
We're going to do a little longer format. It is our Sonic Campfire format. But we ran into Dave, and we have breaking news.
Yeah.
It's
It's killing me.
This just in.
This just in.
Once this is released, you guys will probably have already seen what's up with some regulations. And we just wanted to get it from the man himself who knows about the topic and can speak to it in its rightful manner.
Much more intelligently than us.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, quite so.
I don't know about that, but I'll give it my best.
Yeah.
Yeah, the striped bass situation, I know we talked about it last year, like you said, about a year ago, and things were unfolding at that point. And fisheries management is a complicated beast. We're trying to count something that we can't see, and it moves all the time.
Yeah.
There are these various structures set up throughout the country for managing specifically migratory fish, like the striped bass, and essentially there's an interstate compact called the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. That's states from Maine to Florida. They agreed to participate in it. Just yesterday, they had a striped bass management board meeting to determine kind of the final action on a striped bass management updates. And so the whole idea is that these states work together. They obviously share the fish at different times a year, and there needs to be a structure for these states to work together.
Right.
The commission is managing state waters, which on the Atlantic coast is from 3 miles into the ocean and then inland, and tidal waters.
Sure.
Or what they're managing, and a large series of species. And every state pays into the system. There's federal funding, but it's not a federal body necessarily. It's almost like an experiment in federalism in some ways and states' rights.
Okay.
So there's also federal water management, which is 3 miles to 200. That's an area commonly referred to as the EEZ, or Exclusive Economic Zone. That's something founded in federal law in 1976 called the Magnuson-Stevens Act. That was a period of time when our country had a number of foreign fishing operations happening in federal waters. Our fleets were ramping up to have domestic production of this seafood or use of the seafood. So there's a long history there of these federal law that was created to set boundaries and to manage based on that law. That law is frequently updated, and CCA and a number of our partner organizations on a federal level are constantly paying attention to Magnuson-Stevens. But that's not what manages striped bass. So back to striped bass in the commission level. There's various guidance documents, and the whole body of representatives to the commission includes a governor's appointee. So the governor of any of these states gets to pick somebody. There's the fisheries director or a proxy, which is typically a professional in that species from within the agency.
Oh, right.
So that's kind of the state representative, that's a state employee. And then there's a legislative appointee. So the executive branch essentially gets two choices, legislative gets one. And that every state kind of manages that differently, and then every seat can have proxies that attend per meeting, per species board. There can be an ongoing proxy. I've had the opportunity to sit in the seat at the table for various species in the past. And there's also an opportunity for people to be advisors. And so there's advisory panels for all the different species.
Okay.
And if they're purely commercial, then you're going to have commercial folks advising.
Right.
Sure.
Stakeholders that use the resource. And in striped bass, I'm a recreational advisor for Maryland. Was first appointed to that in 2011. So we meet periodically. Anytime there's a management action, provide advice. Generally, we have in-person meetings every once in a while. We have conference calls to provide that advice. And on the commission, within the commission staff structure, there are what are called FMP coordinators. So an FMP is a fisheries management plan. Fisheries management plan is what guides the management of the fish.
So this is where the work's really being done.
It is.
The FMP.
Yeah, and the whole idea is that all the states are going to develop the science they can develop, the surveys, the studies, get information. There's basically two kinds of information they capture, and that's things called fishery-dependent data or fishery-independent data. So if it's dependent data, it could be going out and on a charter boat and sampling the fish they catch.
Okay.
Yeah.
It could be going into a pound net in the Chesapeake Bay, sampling some of the striped bass coming out of the pound nets. Independent data is going to be things that aren't reliant upon fishing activity. So it could be various samples that they do in a certain way. One key sample that is talked about quite often with striped bass, because it's very important, is something called the Young of Year survey.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot. You know, that's always talked about with, how the population is doing. So,
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So in population dynamics, there's four things fish can do. They can be born, they can die. We all pretty much understand that reality.
Yeah.
Right?
Got it.
I'm
following you.
Yeah. They can come into an area and they can leave an area.
Okay.
Okay.
So those are the four dynamics.
Yep.
Okay.
That's the dynamics of population dynamics, and that's what's called a stock assessment, which is the big scientific model that kind of gives us that idea of what's going on out there.
Okay.
It takes fishery independent data, dependent data, surveys, things like the Young of Year, and tries to understand what's happening to the stock.
Okay.
Massive scientific model that some really, really highly intelligent folks from both state offices and federal offices work together to manage. And so it's really just a sharing of state and federal resources together to figure out how to make sure that we all can have access to these fish, utilize them in a sustainable way, but make sure we're not taking too many.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's really what conservation is all about.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
The sportsmen understand that more than anybody. We pay in, we support, we understand that we have a privilege to take these animals and utilize them how we see fit in a proper way.
Yeah.
So it's a very complicated thing. Striped bass is the largest recreational fishery on the East Coast.
Yeah.
It's the largest economically, at least in tidal waters. Tons of participants. All 365 days of the year you can go and catch one somewhere. It depends where you're fishing, whether or not you can keep it, what the size limit might be, right? It gets to the point sometimes you feel like you're doing your taxes, trying to figure out what the rules are. But,
That's the truth.
Yeah, especially if you're fishing a couple different states.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you have to stay up on it.
You do. And so what triggered the management action we briefly talked about a year ago was this a change in the stock assessment model. It's a new way of looking at things. It's called a benchmark assessment. And so every so often there's a benchmark assessment, and I think with striped bass it's 5 years, somewhere around that. So ultimately they go, all right, we're going to reanalyze all the data sets, all the information. Sometimes the scientists will be uncertain if there's enough data to be viable to use in the model. So let's say a state no longer has funding to do certain surveys. Maybe that data set goes away and you can't use it.
Okay.
So we need to figure out how to place it all together. And so these review boards of really intelligent scientists work together to formulate these stock assessments, and then folks oversee them through a peer review process. And what it means is that the assumptions are legitimate based on the data that we have, and it can be used for management.
Okay.
And so once a peer-reviewed stock assessment comes out, a lot of times folks will say that's ready for prime time. It's ready to be used.
Okay.
That happened last year. It was slightly delayed because of the federal government shutdown and the role that some of the federal folks play, right?
Yeah,
so it finally came out, and what it did was say that the stock is overfished and that overfishing is occurring. So overfished means, if you think of it kind of like a noun, It's the status of the stock from a population perspective. So the management system always sets things called thresholds and targets. Overfished means the biomass of spawning stock biomass in striped bass or the female fish. The estimates are below where they need to be.
Okay.
So they're below the threshold.
Okay.
Kind of like the threshold, like driving off into the median or the shoulder of the road. Right?
Okay.
You don't want to be there.
Yeah.
You want to stay in your lane. The target is really where you want to be, but as long as you're between the threshold and the target, you're doing okay. Trying to meet the biomass target. Overfishing is more of the verb. It's the activity. It's are we catching them at a rate too quickly, so we're driving the biomass in the wrong direction. And so right now with striped bass, and overfishing is measured in something with striped bass called fishing mortality. It's an instantaneous rate that I'm not even going to attempt to describe. It's essentially what are our activities doing and what direction are we driving the population.
Okay.
So with striped bass, population's below where it needs to be, below the threshold, and our fishing mortality rate is above the threshold. So we're too high.
Right.
So they kind of flipped.
Yeah.
And ultimately that triggers certain things to happen. So the management plan that's already been written and has been in place for a very long time, they do two different management actions to a stock or to a fishery management plan. One's called an amendment. One's called an addendum. An amendment is a much longer process, a much more complicated process in amending a fisheries management plan. We've been operating under the Striped Bass Amendment 6 for a very long time. I can't recall exactly when it started, but that's the management plan. And in it has all these different rules. Like one of the rules says if you're overfished or overfishing is occurring, then you're supposed to do certain activities to change that. One of those requirements is that there's a 10-year rebuilding timeline that is a goal. So if you're found to be overfished, so your biomass is down, within 10 years you need to rebuild it back up to the target.
Okay.
Oh,
So you try and set the measures to get back to that point.
yeah.
Okay. So you basically, it's not we're overfished and we got to make this up next year. You have
Some time.
some time.
Yeah, because you need to understand, and this is what the model does. It understands how many young fish are coming in, like the Young of Year survey.
Yeah.
So I'll talk about that in a little bit of detail. Young of Year survey is a very long-standing data set in Maryland and Virginia, which is a massive producer area. Folks have said it at different times. It could be 70 to 90% of the coastwide stock is coming from the Chesapeake Bay.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Maryland is still the largest producer out of the Bay States. It's the Potomac River, the Choptank River, the Nanticoke River. Some of the other rivers also have big spawning areas. There's a big spawning reach just south of the Susquehanna Flats.
Yeah,
kind of
like
off-
Harvard of Grace.
Yep, and south of there a little ways. So, and all that stuff varies.
Yeah.
And a lot of that, there are two different surveys that get at the spawning stock. But for the Young of Year, the Maryland striped bass team, Virginia team, they'll go out and they use what's called a seine net. So small holes. A lot of folks use them for catching bait.
Yep.
You know, so there's a lead line on the bottom. There's corks on the top. There's a pole on each end. It's a set length. I can't remember how long it is, but essentially you sweep an area along a beach. You do that the same every single year. And so there's consistency in that.
Same
in that survey.
beach?
Same
Like same
beach
beach?
or same series of beaches. So
Yeah.
they actually have, and it may not just be a beach, maybe it's just an area
like
that they wait in.
There's data. There's set location markers for that data point.
Yep, and that way it's consistent. There's also some that are additional spots that they're going to survey if the conditions allow, but they don't use them every single year necessarily.
That's a bonus.
Yeah. And so what they do is it's an index, so it's a comparison of year to year to year. How many small striped bass they're going to catch. I just went on this in the spring with the team.
You did.
Yep.
I bet that was pretty cool.
It was very cool. My waders leaked, but that's life.
That's why it was cool.
Yes.
Makes for a long day.
Yeah. So in the spring we went out. We actually went out at right near Tolchester Marina, which was one of those supplemental sites. It wasn't a standard we use every year. Went out on the beach, swept the net, and you scoop it. You get back on the beach, and they're getting all these little fish out of there and putting them in buckets. And with the striped bass, they'll measure them in millimeters. They'll take a scale sample. The scales actually tell us, just like rings on a tree, how old a fish is.
Really?
Yeah, and it's only accurate up to a certain age. But with the juvenile fish, they take that scale. They will actually look at it under a microscope. In truth, how old is this fish? And what they taught me that day was they said, all right, well, fish under a certain length are guaranteed to be 0 or born that year. Fish in a little window there might be 0, they might be 1. So they take the scale sample to try and figure that out.
Okay.
So they're truly counting the ones born that year versus the ones that are maybe a year old.
So you're doing this prior to, like, you did in 2019, right?
Yes.
So you said you did it in the spring. What month was that?
I want to say we did it in June.
So that would have been after.
Yeah,
after
and maybe
the
even
spawn.
July.
Okay.
But it is after the spawn.
Yeah.
And
So
and
that truly is, that some of those are a few months, weeks old.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's really the goal there. And we caught fish, white perch, yellow perch, American shad, a couple different kinds of bay anchovies. I always thought there was just one. But there's a couple different kinds. And that's really neat just for being a fish nerd and an angler. I mean, in some ways it's like playing with bait. But
how often do you catch a bay anchovy when you're fishing?
Right,
you know?
right. They get spit out on your deck, but that's about it. Well, it's neat. So they keep indexes of all that stuff. And the key species that stand out that they're counting are the shad, which have had trouble for decades in population. Menhaden are also counted. Striped bass, some of the perch and stuff, they count everything. But really the striped bass, that survey's talked about the most was striped bass.
Yeah.
So it's a year-to-year average they look at, and then they set if you ever see the bar chart, you'll see a line across it. The line is always the average. And you'll see a press release come out generally in about October or so once all the sites have been surveyed. The states kind of compile their information and go, all right, this is where the young of year index is. And so you want above average spawns. But striped bass, being a long-lived species, only spawn effectively a couple times a decade. Right. On a high level.
Yeah. Okay.
It's kind of by natural design. They're an apex predator, so only so many can fit in an ecosystem.
Yeah.
And they're competing for food.
That was a question that I had. Did they take any environmental factors into account as they're, as we're going to talk about increasing or decreasing the slot limit or the size or?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways that environmental factors are considered. In the model, there's something that's called natural mortality, which really is there's fishing mortality and then natural mortality. So fishing mortality is what we're doing. Yeah. The natural mortality piece is something they try and understand based on certain factors like that.
Okay.
And that really drives the kind of the survivability of the year class of fish that are born. So the young of year survey is looking at, all right, how many do we think are born? Then as they move on in life, we know that death is an exercise in exponential decay. So the most young of year rockfish there's ever going to be is the second they're born. And over time, there's an exponential decay, and that's just kind of a known population dynamic thing.
Right.
And so the young of year helps the stock assessment understand that, let's just say, for 2011 was a record year class. So the survey told us that. And so the stock assessment assumes there's X number of tens of millions of year zero fish born. And then over time, it just trickles down into nothing eventually.
Right.
Eventually there'll be no 2011s left. 2015 was a high year class. And so what's almost driven us to this point essentially is not enough fish were born and too many fish were killed. Right. And that's what leads to an overfish status. So the biomass isn't keeping up.
Yeah.
And then the overfishing piece is really what our control is.
Yeah.
We should have lowered our fishing mortality rate probably a little bit earlier. And that's debatable, right? Because it's all a trade-off.
Yeah, no one wants to be told that they can't keep as many fish.
Exactly. Yeah. And this fisheries management is imprecise effort because it is so difficult.
Yeah.
And folks that are involved in it need to appreciate that. It's a very complicated thing, and you could stand there and argue all day long about it. Another way they commonly refer to it is like making sausage. Or scrapple, maybe.
Yeah.
It may taste good, but you probably don't want to see how it happens.
Know how it happens. Yeah.
So it is highly complicated, and of course, there's a lot of debate. But ultimately, another piece of the puzzle when it comes to productivity and fish becoming successful to grow up to where we care about them when we can catch them, is there's a lot of natural factors at play. One thing that can definitely impact a year class, a whole bunch of them can be born. They could have really successful spawn, really good conditions for the spawn.
Yeah.
All the larvae survive. Well, we could get a late snowstorm somewhere up in New York.
Yeah.
Hits the Susquehanna, massive cold water flush.
Yep.
Sediment loading, those kinds of things that we know happen. That could wipe out the baby fish.
Yeah.
And so the scientists are very good at understanding those kinds of factors, but ultimately the stock assessment relies upon the data and the survey observations that occur.
Right.
Yeah.
And
so we're going to try to control the factors that we can control.
Yes.
To keep these fish viable.
Yep. And we can try and understand what's happening around us, but in the end we have to kind of observe what's happening and then make reasonable assumptions. Yeah. So there's a lot of all that going on, and ultimately over the last year, there's an addendum which was enacted. An addendum is a shorter management action than an amendment. So addendum 6, and you'll see addendums referred to in Roman numerals. The last addendum, which brought about the change from 18 inches to 20 inches, in the Chesapeake.
Yeah.
That was driven by also the stock declining based on the what was at that time called a stock assessment update, which is not a benchmark, so it's not all brand new data. It's the same model, just with updated data.
Okay.
So updated data on our catch, on our effort that we're putting out there as anglers, and the young of the year and all those kinds of things are constantly updated. So we can just get a new picture of what we think's happening. So that was that happened. I think the regulations hit the water in 2015 for that. So that was Addendum 4. There was a draft Addendum 5 introduced, but it never went anywhere. And so now the one that just is being completed and pretty much was completed yesterday is Addendum 6. So Addendum 4 said reduce mortality or reduce harvest by 20.5% in the Bay States, 25% on the coast. Wow. That's to try and change this downward trend we were seeing.
Right.
That's a lot of fish.
It is.
That's a huge reduction.
Yeah.
25%.
Huge reduction.
Yeah.
It is. And it didn't work based on the information we're seeing. And that's why Addendum 6
So
is
those regs
here.
that hit in 2015, that was the 25% reduction?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. 20.5 in the Bay.
Yeah.
25
right.
on the coast. And there were a lot of different details as to how the board, the Straight Bass Management Board, again, with 3 representatives per state from Maine to North Carolina in this case.
Yeah.
That's where the fish exists.
I remember when that hit,
Yeah.
and that year I was able to do quite a lot of straight bass fishing, and you know how many I would catch that were 19 and a half then?
Yep.
Yeah.
Like, it was like, wow. You know,
And that's exactly, it's somewhat by design. I mean,
Yeah.
the same thing happens in
Yep.
flounder fishing,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
basically managed the same way. Everybody goes, man, I caught one a quarter inch smaller than the size limit. That's on purpose.
yeah, exactly.
It's protecting those fish to make them grow up. And,
Yeah.
of course, there is catch and release mortality. That's talked about a lot, especially in this stock assessment for some various reasons. That does exist.
Yeah.
In straight bass, there is an assumption that year-long coast-wide, there's a catch and release mortality of 9%.
Okay.
So 9 out of every 100 fish you throw back may die. And it's may die. We're not 100% sure.
Right.
But that's a number that the managers are comfortable with based on some scientific studies that many argue should be updated. And, from a recreational fishing conservation organization seat,
Yeah.
I absolutely believe that we should have really accurate information on that so we
Yeah.
can be, good stewards of the resource.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that would help anglers.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not comfortable with 9%. It's 9% doesn't sound bad, but if we're wrong and it's 15%,
That's where maybe it's 20. Maybe who knows?
you're right.
It's
yeah.
Well, and a key piece of that is always understanding, not only investing in surveys or studies that try and get at those
Yeah.
answers, but also educating the public.
Right.
So a lot of the last year
Well,
and a half.
would that be how like the circle hook regulations
Exactly.
came into play? Was
Yep.
that based on those kind of numbers, like that 9% of catch and release?
Yeah, and so we have this coast-wide stock of fish. Mm-hmm. We have a coast-wide fishing mortality target. We have then state-by-state regulations. So the idea is that all the state regulations mirror each other in some way to be equivalent to each other and add up to the overall goal.
Right.
So if the overall goal is increase fishing mortality, we're all going to get smaller size limits.
Yeah.
So those 19.5s will be in your cooler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those things will change. And then in the inverse, of course, the size limit goes up. You're going to be able to keep less fish. The circle hook piece is important. A lot of fisheries throughout the country, like billfish is a perfect example of where circle hooks came on board. There were some federal regulations that came into place, I think first for fishing tournaments, where if you're using any live or dead bait, you had to use a circle hook.
Okay.
People griped and complained. You open your tackle drawer and you don't have any circle hooks, and the government says you got to buy circle hooks now and throw away all that stuff you have. It can be frustrating.
Right.
And I used to do quite a bit of offshore fishing, so I remember that, and the message boards and the conversations were always, people having debate.
Yeah.
Ultimately, if you look back, almost the entire billfish world now is fishing circle hooks.
Yeah.
They're working. I think billfish populations in general are responding to that.
That's great.
Yeah, and then we can go out there and spend tons of money on a boat, drive the economy of places like Ocean City, and know that we're not impacting these fish,
Right.
but having a lot of fun doing it.
That's not a huge. I mean, I've never bought a circle hook for catching billfish, but I mean, it's a financial burden, but it's not. And I think that's something that most, and maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but I think that's something that most reasonable anglers would probably support. What am I going to do with 300 J hooks? But you get it.
Yeah, you do.
I think
Yeah.
you
It's
get
better
it.
than having a drawer full of lead shot when they
government switched you over
Yeah,
to
the
steel.
steel, right?
You know, I mean, it could be worse.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and
And
no different
Don't
than
get Bucky on that. Huh?
well, and any of the gear we're using.
Yeah.
There's
Right.
this constant evolution that yes, when things change, there's this knee-jerk reaction, which is perfectly reasonable.
But it's
for most
life.
sportsmen.
Yeah.
Right?
Things change,
Yeah,
they do.
and
Yeah.
people change.
You
and,
get
and
over
year-
the.
And if you look back a year later, that is meaningless.
Sure.
Yep.
Sure.
Yeah, most people forget it quickly. The billfish example is perfect. A
Yeah.
perfect example of that. In the Gulf of Mexico, I don't know the reg off the top of my head, but I'm nearly certain that when you're reef fishing, you're using circle hooks.
Really?
Almost certain, but it's by regulation. We want to shallow hook these fish. Deep hooking is what kills them.
Yeah.
There's other factors as well. In fact, there's federal legislation being considered right now. It's called the Descend Act. So if you ever deep fished for fish in deep water, you pull them up,
Yeah.
and they go through barotrauma.
Right.
It's
Right.
like a diver getting the bends coming back to
Yeah.
the surface. Well, we figured out through various studies, a lot of them driven by conservation dollars or privately funded efforts through universities, maybe state and federal partnerships. We do these studies and try and figure out what our impact is. So the Descend Act, there's descending devices that are going to be, I believe, mandated by this act for all users in the Gulf of Mexico for, I think, the red snapper fishery, but also some other fisheries where we know deep water impacts. If you pull this fish up and you unhook it and just throw it back because it's maybe not legal,
Right.
that fish may just kind of flip around on the surface and not survive.
Yeah.
So for a while there were needles you would poke in them to try and release the pressure, let them down. These descending devices clip onto the jaw kind of like a boga grip.
Yeah.
You drop it down with a weight. When it gets to a certain depth, it has a pressure release. It releases it, and they found out that what you're doing is slowly lowering the fish down, letting them settle back out.
Right on.
Their air bladder settles back out, their eyes kind of go back in, and they're off to go, and they're good.
Really?
Yeah, so there's tons of research that's being done. Our state chapter in Texas, where CCA was founded, and our home offices for our national office is doing a lot of that work in partnership with some various sport fish science centers. So
That's
really
cool.
cool stuff. But
Yeah.
ultimately, it's up to us to be on the forefront of understanding our impact on the fish.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to release a fish and waste it.
No.
Yeah.
If you
No.
Yeah.
a lot of responsibility comes along with that. So in the Chesapeake, we've done some studies. So what brought about the opening of the Susquehanna Flats catch and release fishery? So in 1985, the fisheries closed. 1990, the fishery started reopening after a 5-year moratorium. And then by the late 90s, the population's back. I think 95 was the year it was considered recovered. And that's actually the new goal for the biomass is to try and get
It
it
is.
at the 95 level.
Wow.
And that's even being debated. Like, is that too high? Will we ever get back to it? Because we've had trouble kind of keeping the biomass at that level, depending which way you look at it. But ultimately, in the late 90s, Maryland DNR put together a couple studies on hook and release mortality. It's been known that striped bass, as a fish that in their adult stage live in primarily saltwater in the ocean, in the cooler ocean waters, come into the rivers to spawn. They go through a physiological change to handle the freshwater as they spawn and turn around and leave. And so the adult fish goes through this stress. And so they wanted to understand, okay, well, anglers want to have access to this fishing spot that's great fishing. You know, the population's doing well. Why don't we do a study, work with the anglers, and figure out what kind of tackle they can use? So some circle hook studies were done at that point to figure out different kinds of circle hooks, where they hook the fish. A scientist named Rudy Lukakovic did most of that work, and it's been published. It actually relates directly to that 9% number.
Does it?
In some ways. And they found out that in the Susquehanna Flats, in the spring, under normal conditions, salinity conditions, you're going to have very low mortality, post-release mortality. It could be less than 3%. But then you fast forward to like July, high water temperatures. If it's a really wet year, like 18 and early 19 were, the salinity is real low, so the fish can't recover as well.
Yeah.
Even the juvenile fish living in the bay throughout their first many years, they need some salinity to really be totally healthy. So another piece is we know in freshwater, stripers don't handle catch and release well at all. So especially when they're down deep in the colder water during the summertime, guys drop live baits to them.
Yeah.
That is not a catch and release fishery. It's not one where that fish is going to survive.
Really?
Yeah. So there's all these different information we have about that animal, the striped bass, and you have to understand it. And but ultimately, the management plan 9% year-long coastwide. And in Maryland, the circle hooks came about in 2018 because the 20-inch limit wasn't working out for especially the charter captains who are out on the water every day catching a lot of fish, and they're great fishermen. I mean, they put their people on fish and do a great job of it. They started experiencing a lot of releasing because of those fish that were just under the size limit. And they're saying, look, we're wasting these fish. And there were some dead fish floating around. Some of them are recreational releases. Some of them could have come out of a pound net dead. Some of them may have died just because of terrible water quality. We don't know because we haven't truly studied that impact, but we can make some educated guesses.
Sure.
So the conversation started and said, all right, well, charter captain said, look, we want a 19-inch fish. We know that if you give us a 19-inch fish, we're going to catch those 19-inch fish, put them in the cooler.
And be done.
Right,
yeah.
Finish our day, maybe go catch catfish or perch or spot or something else, right? Many times they'll just go back to the dock if that's what their clients want. And there's a ton of diversity across our charter community, or what you would refer to as the for-hire portion of the recreational sector. And charter captains are a part of the recreational fishery. A lot of times folks refer to them as a bus driver. You're hiring them, they're driving the bus, taking you out.
Yep.
But you, the recreational angler, are who is really retaining the fish.
Right.
Yeah. But ultimately, Circle Oaks came about to say, okay, well, we think our mortality might be as high as 27% in the summertime, if not higher.
Wow.
And so they're like, all right, deep hooking is a big part of that. A J hook down deep, they swallow chum or chunks, and it's down deep, it hooks them, it's going to kill them. Even if you don't notice it right away, there's probably some fatal damage down there. So ultimately they get, if you're going to release them, or even just, all fishing has a catch and release component to it. Not everybody catches a legal fish every time they fish.
Right.
So the idea was that, okay, if we can turn the dead released fish into kept fish, then we're going to waste less fish.
Yeah.
Therefore, we can make a smaller size limit available. And that's all part of the stock assessment and this analysis that happened. And essentially, the whole analysis is going, all right, how many fish do we think are out there? And what section of them do we want people to have access to?
Okay.
And if we know approximately how many are going to be out there, we can kind of draw almost like a circle on that chart and go, okay, these are the ones we think they'll catch with these size limits.
Yeah.
So it's always all these different variables moving around. And after 2 years, that Circle Oak regulation did sunset, meaning when they put the regulation in place, which is through executive branch action, the agency DNR promotes regulation. It got approved, but it expired in December 31st of 19.
Okay.
And so we just finished a public comment period on bringing back that regulation. And that was important because I think people are now ready. There's nothing perfect about circle hooks, but we're learning quickly, and I think over the next decade we're all going to look back and go, okay, this is just how we use, right?
We get it.
Yeah. So they're going to that regulation is probably actually being put in place today, which means it'll actually be on the water by the end of the month.
Wow.
Okay. So by March 1st.
Wow.
And I'll jump in here and say a lot of people don't really, they'll knee-jerk react like, oh, I don't want that circle hook. But do you really know that it's going to impact you? Like, for example, going to Canada, you can't use the barbless hooks.
Barbless.
Who couldn't?
And I wouldn't, now looking back, I couldn't tell you I knew exactly for sure how that was going to affect my outcome. And guess what? It didn't affect my outcome.
Right.
I caught fish. I kept fish on.
I catch more fish with bait on a circle hook than I do with a J hook.
I would have been oblivious if there's a barb on that hook or not.
Yeah, I don't have that responsibility of setting the hook. If you're fishing 2-3 rods at a time, you can't.
Something little I guess to me that's something little, and if that's going to ensure that I'm going to be able to catch fish year in year out, that's a no-brainer, guys. I mean,
yep. Well, so there's actually here at the show there's the DNR booth, the Fish and Hunt Maryland booth.
Yeah,
they're handing out sample circle hooks.
Okay,
it's an 8.0 laser sharp non-offset Eagle Claw.
I wonder how many times you can go back.
Yeah, well, times.
So CCA Maryland worked with some other partners and Bass Pro Shops down in Maryland, and we purchased 6,000 hooks for DNR.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Nice.
And gave them to them for educational purposes.
Yeah.
So, we're helping. That's, the role we play in working with them. A big part of my job is butting heads with them sometimes, and we'll get into that very quickly here. But ultimately, we're talking a lot about the management system in general, and all this stuff is we entrust these agencies to manage our public resource. It belongs to all of us,
right?
And it's complicated. I always tell people, you remember growing up as a kid, if you had brothers and sisters, you had to share stuff with them.
Yep.
That's not easy. Well, now try sharing something with millions of anglers around the country, right?
Geez.
Yeah, and you have to trust them, too.
Trust, yeah. It's a big part of it.
Because I was going to ask, and my first knee-jerk reaction when I hear about universities are doing these studies and whatnot is we all have seen we'll call it climate change now. That's the going term. And the science behind it, or the lack of science, or the lack of shared science.
Yeah.
Certain studies, they don't even want to tell you how they did their study. And there's a lot of trust that has to go on, that you're taking good data, good studies from unbiased sources to truly manage that. It gives you the facts. Because that's what you're doing. You're facts seeking.
Yeah.
And you can't have somebody putting their thumb on the scale either to do justice for both sides, for the game and for man.
Right. There's got to be trust there. There's got to be transparency. And, across the millions of Americans, it's obviously complicated. Even a hot topic like climate change is very complicated.
But this conversation, I think, is very much needed in more. I wish fishermen and hunters on the other side, on the hunting side, should understand what goes behind the decision-making process. Because, again, before we had this conversation, Stevie was talking about his catch-and-release season, and he's worried about it. But now I think, having had this conversation, we understand why there's a catch-and-release season and why that season's chosen for that, and why, and maybe that's not, now we understand if they get rid of it, why, and get behind it even more.
Right. Yeah, and that's,
if that's what's necessary, Lord forbid.
Yeah,
but,
and that's a big part of my day-to-day job. It's to make sure we educate our community on the conservation of marine resources, but also making sure we have access to them, because it's a sliding scale. It's if things tip too far, you no longer have the sportsman community going out there and enjoying these resources, maybe utilizing them for food or enjoyment or whatever it is. There's a massive economic benefit to all that. All our license fees pay into conservation in some way.
Absolutely.
And so we also, look at a show like this. If it wasn't for a love of the outdoors, it wouldn't be here.
Right.
This is, the state of Pennsylvania alone is a perfect example of just a massive sportsman community that just lives and breathes it.
Yep.
So that's where license fees come in, and management and trust and all those pieces of the puzzle. But ultimately, we talked about the flats. It was open based on science.
Yeah.
And it's on the chopping block at this point. So I mentioned the circle hooks are going to be back in place likely today. That regulation will officially be finalized. Also, the trophy season, which has always started the third Saturday of April, will now start May 1st.
Okay.
And so that gains year to year. It's different because it's not a set date. It's the third Saturday.
Yeah.
Right. And then there has always been a single fish that charter captains could keep for themselves. So they've given that up. So that's one other conservation piece that's saving fish. They won't be keeping them. And then there's a lot of what happened yesterday was this debate of all the states had these plans that are called conservation equivalency plans. And so the Addendum 6 says we approve these measures that equal an 18% reduction in total removals of fish in future years. The year they looked at to drop from 18% from was 2017. So 2017 was the last year of the stock assessment where all the data was compiled. Yeah. And they went, all right, this is our snapshot of what we think happened, the status of the stock, and what happened in 2017. So from this level, the board agreed to lower mortality, or all removals, by 18%. And the removals are commercial catch, which is set to a quota, so pounds of fish that each state gets. Recreational catch, which is based on just fishing mortality, which is derived from number of fish you can keep. So your creel limit, the length of them. So like we talked about already, they set that length accordingly. And then the number of days on the water. And it's one correlation in managing recreational catch is similar to like waterfowl. Yeah. They give us they survey the birds. Yep. They give us X number of days, and they know that you're not going to kill your 5 or 6 birds a day, whatever your limit is.
Right.
You're probably going to kill 1.2 birds a day or something like that, right? Yeah. And so that all plays into how big of a calendar you get.
Right.
It's very similar.
I'd be thrilled with 1.2.
Yeah, he's like 2.02.
Oh, yeah. Maybe another 0 in there.
Yeah. You'd still need a whole box of ammunition for that one.
That'll get you started.
That's where we don't talk about price per pound on duck breast to anybody. But that's essentially what's happening with recreational removals. The 9% piece is another story of it. So there's this massive coastwide year-long federal survey called MRIP, the Marine Recreational Information Program. That is an attempt to understand the catch and the effort of the recreational fishing community. And so you may get interviewed at the dock with a person with a clipboard.
Yeah.
In the old days, you get a phone call at your house. They just switched the methodology, and it took a few years. So they're no longer calling household phones because we don't have them anymore.
No.
Yeah.
So now they're doing a mail survey.
Okay.
Make it a little postcard in the mail.
I mean, I've gotten those for the federal for waterfowl over the years.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
And they're in various species have different rules, like tuna, sharks, swordfish, billfish. You actually have to fill out a card and tag that fish.
okay.
That's a kind of an accountability system on those fish, even recreationally. But with stripers, they're basically trying to understand catch and effort year long, coast wide, and they derive that into something called catch per unit effort, which is not that much different than that, like 1.2 ducks per day per hunter. And that helps them to go, okay, well, if this many anglers are catching this many fish with X amount of time on the water, we can make assumptions about the overall population of the fish from that.
Right.
So recreational catch estimates actually drive assumptions about population in the stock assessment.
Right.
Don't ask me how, because it's like this mind-blowing mathematical equation.
How bad?
Yeah. But that's essentially it. So recreational catch is important to understand, and so is the dead discard or the 9% mortality piece. And we have to make sure that's right, because recreational fishing is such a big piece of the puzzle. And then you have commercial discard, so fish that may not be legal, may die because of the gear, and that's used in various ways, but each gear kind of has an associated percentage with it. You know,
Okay.
Anchored gill nets kill more than not. Pound nets technically hold the fish alive until they're pulled onto the boat. So there's all these other factors. But it's those four things they look at for removal. So that's supposed to be reduced 18%. The plan approved that in October. Now the states went back home and said, all right, we're going to have to work through this. So the intent was that all the removals were reduced by 18%. Maryland made the decision to not reduce commercial catch. They, on paper, have reduced it by 1.8%. Which was this kind of flawed methodology as to why we picked that number that I won't even get into. But ultimately, commercialize a quota. It's been the same since 2015.
Yeah.
And the way our commercial fishery works is individuals have a percentage of the quota allocated to them through what's called an individual transferable quota. So if all of us were sitting around the table, we're all commercial. Based on our long-term catch history, they put this into place. And the red crab fishery, like deadliest catch, same thing. Go out and catch your quota, right?
Yep.
Some of the boats have a bigger quota than others.
Yeah.
Same idea with commercial fishers in Maryland. They have a license. They have a quota. If you don't have a good catch history, the state decided to keep some of the fish, some of the quota in what's called common pool. And if you sign up for emails, you get these emails that say the gillnet fishery opens at this date, closes by this date. And what they're doing is attempting to let these folks catch these fish month over the year, and it's kind of a race to the fish. So it's for the people that don't have that long-term catch history.
Gotcha.
So these systems are, ultimately what we're trying to manage with striped bass is a very blended fishery. It's commercial and recreational.
Yeah.
Two wildly different activities.
Yeah.
Right? So that leads to the complexity. But ultimately, Maryland decided they're going to lower the quota 1.8%. But generally speaking, the commercial fisheries caught less than the quota anyway. So it's really not a savings of fish necessarily. And
so they didn't catch 100% of the quota.
No, and actually, you can't see them through the podcast. But there's a bar chart here that shows that stuff. And I'm working on a big post on our website to explain all this.
Okay.
But ultimately, even if they go over their quota, they pay it back the next year. There's all these different provisions in the plan.
Gotcha.
The Chesapeake has the largest commercial fisheries between Maryland and Virginia. I think Maryland's quota is right around 1.455 million pounds next year, based on Addendum 6.
Wow.
And so at the end of the year, what they'll do is the management body, to have oversight over everybody participating in striped bass fisheries, they have these compliance reports, and they make sure that the state turns in a report and says, this is how we performed, and then the board takes action. If somebody was out of line, there's this whole process. If they're in line, they just keep moving forward.
Right.
But ultimately, there's checks and balances there. So on the recreational side, what a major factor that changed between the last stock assessment and the new one is how the MRIP system changed. So they went from telephone surveys to the mail. They overlapped the data for many years to try and figure out, is it statistically sound? Can it be peer-reviewed? Is it a proper sample? And, they say about, what was it Mark Twain said about statistics, right? It's lies, damn lies, and statistics. It's a slightly cynical view of it all, but it's the truth. I mean, statistics can be twisted any which way you want.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sit here, I'm not going to tell you that any of this is politicized on the statistical side. There's tons of oversight and participation. These folks are doing an extremely tough job scientifically. But ultimately, there's a technical committee that dives in and digs into all these details. They advise the board, hey, board, this is what we figured out. There's a law enforcement committee that says, hey, if you're considering these regulations, we kind of like them or we kind of don't. All those things are a piece of the ASMFC puzzle, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. So between last stock assessment and this one, there's been this massive change in estimates about recreational catch, recreational effort, and recreational live releases or discards. And so that's driven a lot of the complexity here. And I do have a chart here that obviously, again, people can't see, but there's these lines where commercial and recreational catch, this is the old system where they're trending along next to each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And out of the moratorium, Maryland DNR, working with many different groups, said, look, we're going to try and balance catch at about 42.5% of what Maryland gets to commercial and 57.5% to recreational.
Wow, I didn't
including
realize
charter.
that was that. I would have just assumed that, commercial was double, what recreational would be.
Well, if you go down to the participant, there's about, I can't remember how many. I think it's like 1,100 permit holders at this point.
Really?
There's potential for more, I think. But there's not a lot of commercial operators compared to the recreational fishery.
Recreational includes party boats,
Yep,
charters,
party boats, charter boats,
that kind of stuff. Okay.
The average angler. So,
but not somebody out netting thousands of pounds of fish.
Right, that's commercial,
okay.
Yeah. And they have permits and quotas and all those
Sure.
kinds of things. They have to tag all their fish. But ultimately, we were tracking around that 60-40 balance. It varied year to year because the recreational fishery definitely goes up and down.
Yeah.
There's millions of people, or in the Bay, a couple 100,000 people participating each year. But now the new numbers are the red line, which is well above it.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
So what this did was it scaled up the understanding of the population, because all of a sudden they're like, well, if there's this many people we think are out there fishing and catching this many fish, there must be this many more fish out there. And so it almost left the charter or the commercial fishery kind of behind. And it looks like now the ratio in the Chesapeake is about 80-20 instead of 60-40.
Wow, 80% recreational.
Yeah. And then if you throw in the discard number, like the fish that are believed to die based on release, I think it's 85% recreational, 15% commercial. Or 85 recreational, 15 commercial. And again, these are all estimates.
Sure.
But they're the best available science is the term used for this stuff. So we have to use it unless you have something better. What we've been advocating for more than a decade is for Maryland DNR to do a better job of surveying anglers, create more timely and dynamic systems that are meant to manage the Chesapeake Bay, not just coastwide.
Right.
Because if this massive statistical sample, this MRIP thing, is designed for coastwide year-long trends, year-to-year trends, not what exactly happened in May of 2017.
Right.
But when Maryland came out and derived some of the seasons, which is this other table that's probably been seen a lot, they tried to put together all these different options, and what they're doing to come up with conservation equivalency proposals is cutting up MRIP to levels of resolution it was never intended to be cut up by.
Yeah.
So there's this big debate happening. Our conservation equivalency, is it acceptable? So the board said, everybody cut by 18%, and come back to us with your plan on how you're going to do it. And they gave some prescribed measures. They said if the Bay states do one fish at 18, you don't have to change the season. You just get one fish at 18 for all recreational fishers. Whether you're on the beach, whether you're on a pier, whether you're on a charter boat, doesn't matter. One fish at 18. No change in season, no change in the trophy season either. So the trophy season is targeting the adult spawning stock biomass.
Yeah.
The summer-fall fishery is targeting the younger fish. Mm-hmm. And then the coastwide measure for the ocean fishery was 28 to less than 35 inches slot. And so they're going to allow that one fish.
That's the 3 mile.
That's within 3 miles.
Oh, that's within 3 miles.
Yeah, you cannot pursue, harass, catch, do anything to striped bass outside 3 miles legally.
Okay.
Like technically, if you're out past 3 miles and you catch one, don't even take it out of the water, release it, move on. You're not supposed to be targeting them.
Gotcha.
And that's kind of a refuge that they've been given by federal rule.
We probably don't have to worry about that too much, do we, Dave?
I don't know, man. My casting arm's getting better.
You got a casting cannon? You guys get one of those yet?
3 miles.
We'll start drone fishing.
Yeah.
That with some fins on board.
So they are protected out there, but ultimately, those are the two off-the-shelf options any state could have taken.
Yeah.
Most states don't want that. They want to use this conservation equivalency proposal, which is on paper, everything equals the same level of mortality and removals that those other off-the-shelf options provide.
Okay.
So Maryland's used conservation equivalency for a very long time, and that's what gives us the 18-inch size limit traditionally. And even the commercial fishery has some tweaks and changes in that they use. But ultimately, our proposals, so on the table has always been 1 at 18, and then Maryland put together 4 different options. Yesterday at the commission meeting, every single state went down the list and said, this is our preferred conservation equivalency measure we plan on putting in place. Because the concern is if you have different regs, you're catching all the same body of fish.
Yeah.
Right.
Different part of their life, different part of the year, different part of the country, but they're all the same fish.
Yeah.
It's all part of the same stock assessment. So just intuitively and logically, people go, well, shouldn't we have consistent regs?
Yeah.
Where it's almost like the 2 hunt clubs next to each other fighting over what size buck they're going to kill.
Right. They're the same bucks
yeah.
that cross property line boundaries.
Yeah, if we all kill spike bucks, there's going to be nothing but spike. We're never going to get bigger, right? But if we all wait till they're 8 points, then think of the hunt club or property owners analogy in fish management. So that a lot of that unfolded yesterday. The meeting ended up being probably more than 8 hours when it was all said and done. I think it started 45 minutes early. It ended. By the time it ended, I was so brain dead it wasn't even funny.
I imagine.
Yeah, it was crazy. But you watch each state go down the map and go, all right, this is what we want to do. But in the end, everybody said, all right, if we can understand, and I think they did direct the technical people to come back in May and let us know, based on what everybody's chosen and implemented, did we meet the 18% on paper? And never forget, there's a massive difference between on paper and on the water.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a big part of where we as an organization have been questioning some of the choices and saying, is this going to work on the water? Because ultimately that's what matters.
Yeah.
Right.
And not to say that managers are wrong, but fisheries management is science and management. Management has a lot of leeway in making sound decisions. The science is what it is.
Yeah.
You can't. There should be no bias. So it's the blend of those things. But ultimately, it looks like Maryland will definitely go with the May 1 trophy season start. Looks like they're going to close April.
For everything.
All targeting of striped bass in April. So no more Susquehanna Flats fishery, no
That's
going to
a
a pier,
killer.
no going to the Calvert Cliffs nuclear power plant's always been a real popular one in the wintertime.
Yeah.
Guys like jigging there and catching big fish.
Yeah.
Nowhere in state waters can you pursue striped bass. Not the coast. Like the coast is different, but in the Chesapeake.
Until May 1st.
Until May 1st.
Wow.
Okay. And so that's a big piece we've been focused on. The regulatory process that's already unfolded is complete. It's likely that today the final decision's been made. And again, that's redo circle hooks, May 1st trophy season start, no targeting in April. Unfortunately, on paper, no targeting looks like it makes sense. But if you look at the underlying data, it goes back to MRIP.
Yeah.
And one of the criticisms that we've provided is the MRIP numbers in 2017, which is the number we're supposed to reduce by. They say that private catch drove MRIP estimates through the roof. Huh. So those lines, that red line that moved up the chart, it's mostly because of private catch, not charter boat. So shore-based or private anglers or rental boats is what they call it. All the private stuff increased anywhere from about 100% to 1,000%, depending what time of year you look at.
Huh.
MRIP looks at everything in two-month waves. So January, February, March, April, May, June, chopped up in blocks. So the first set of surveys and data we have from Maryland is March, April, wave 2, 61 days. In 2017, it was 9 days of open season for trophy fish. And that's absolutely the point where all the boats hit the water, opening day. Right. I mean, people come, the radio's hilarious. I mean, listen along to the VHF radio that day.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Planer boards and lines crossing, and people yelling at each other, and people hooting and hollering, catching big fish, having a good time. Massive economic benefit.
Yeah.
And it's always been debated, too. Like, if these fish are so important to the stock, why are we killing them?
Right.
That's a debate you hear a lot of times, but, we'll leave that for another day.
Yeah.
So the 9-day window that was open for catch, MRIP told us that during 61 days, including those 9, 513,000 fish were released by anglers in Maryland. Huh. That's like 8,400 fish per day.
Wow.
When only 9 days were open for fishing, legal take.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And just doing the math, it's almost impossible that people are out there catching fish at this rate.
Right.
So we immediately went, all right, well, we don't believe that number. We don't have anything else to prove that it's wrong other than just logic and kind of some simple math. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, if you're basing 9% of those fish dying as a part of your conservation measure to reduce mortality, it's a fantasy. And so that's been the criticism we provided to that piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
And we said, look, March and April, there's not a lot of people fishing.
No.
We are absolutely on board with getting better information about who is fishing. We are absolutely on board about trying to fund and implement studies like the one that opened the Flats fishery before you just close it based on these numbers that nobody believes. We also said you can't take a 9% catch and release number that's year-long coast-wide and apply it to a 2-month period with wildly imprecise numbers like 513,000 live releases and simply multiply 9% by it. Maryland's own science says it's less than 3%. It's even less than 1% in most situations.
Wow. Yeah.
We've already got a reg in place that's, if you were bait fishing in March, April, circle hooks.
Right.
If you have a greater than half-inch gap. Also, all the spawning rivers are closed.
Right.
From the mouth up.
Right.
So these fish stage and then hang out, conditions get right. I'm sure the girls say, okay, it's time.
Yep.
Just like everything else in nature.
Yeah.
And off they go, right? They spawn. Nobody's harassing those fish unless they're doing it illegally. Right? So that protection was put in place in 1990. So we're saying, all right, why are you taking away March and April from people that just want to go out there, shake off the winter blues, spend some money, buy some new equipment, and have some fun? Maybe book a hotel, stop by at Royal Farms and get some fried chicken. You name it.
Pay
right?
your toll going across
pay
the
the
bridge.
toll.
Yeah.
So there's this massive economic benefit, and there's been no economic analysis in any of this. It's not like DNR has staff economists. That's just not going to happen.
Right.
And that's not unique to Maryland, right? It's complicated. But, we're sitting here going, if you call this conservation, you're undercutting the actual fish that need to be saved.
Yeah.
And so we've been frustrated by the fact that Maryland will be closing in April.
Yeah, that's bad news.
Yeah.
At least for me. I mean, I understand. The
Well, and we said, look, I'll give up March. Personally, I'd give up March, February, January. I don't care if you tell me that you have good information. Let's give it up.
Yeah.
But if you're not going to be saving fish, you're not helping anybody.
It was second week of April last year, maybe, and I went to a pier. I was the only one there for 6 or 7 hours. Like there was nobody else there.
Yeah.
So it wasn't, and I caught 24, 25 fish, but none of them were over 15, 16 inches. You know? So it wasn't. They weren't spawning fish. That's for sure. And it's the same fish somebody's going to catch in May, June, July, this year, next year, the year,
Right. Well, and on the flats,
resident fish.
Yeah, on the flats specifically, they found that most of the fish they're catching are small males or females, too. It's not like you can exactly tell, but just like everything, they're born about 50-50 male-female, but the females start leaving the bay and don't come back until their spawning age at a certain rate. It varies, and it's all depending on the actual fish.
Yeah.
But so there's this idea that even in Maryland, catching these smaller fish, it's more sustainable because you're catching the males, and they're not as important to the spawning stock. Plus, they're more quickly replaceable. If you catch a younger animal, it can be replaced more quickly by nature.
Right. Yeah.
If you catch a 30-year-old animal, it took that animal a long time to get to that point.
Yeah.
So, just complexity. But ultimately, that was definitely moving forward April 30th. So option 4, if anybody's seen it on anything Maryland DNR's put out, is what's going down. And so charter boats are giving up a fish. They're saying that is a savings of 0.08%. They're saying that the April closure is 0.64%.
Wow.
And if you added numbers of fish to this, I think our overall goal was to kill about 365,000 less fish in Maryland. So remember, commercial is going to maybe take a cut, but not really. It's all in the backs of the recreational angling community to stop it. So moving on into the summer, they're going to close the summer period for 16 days and also have a non-targeting provision, meaning you're not supposed to go out and pursue striped bass from a 16-day period in the summer. They put on the proposal August 16th to 31st for that closure.
How do you... So, like, say I'm fishing the chop tank, okay, on that pier, and the same setup I catch stripers, I catch catfish.
You're throwing a chunk of meat on a hook.
Yeah, how am I not targeting striped bass? Just for a sidebar there.
Nearly impossible to avoid striped bass.
Yeah.
And if you looked at the right page in the stock assessment, you'd see
okay, I'm not going to throw a 6-inch cedar plug.
Right. And
that's me saying I'm not targeting bass.
And so there was a bit of a conversation yesterday about the non-targeting provision.
Yeah.
Can we count this as conservation?
Right.
And what they ultimately did from a technical perspective, because remember, there's a technical committee that vets all these plans on paper in science and gives their advice. They said non-targeting is hard to quantify, hard to count.
Yeah.
So we're not really sure how to handle this. Board, we would recommend to you that you're careful, right?
Right.
So the board is who's debating yesterday. And then I have the law enforcement committee memo in front of me. So when it comes to no targeting provisions, the law enforcement body, which comes from all the different states, says absent of a definition of targeting,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Including provisions for gear type, tackle, and bait, so you can define targeting in some ways.
Yeah.
It's impossible to enforce this measure,
Yeah.
is what they said. This may be particularly difficult to define when anglers are using the same or similar fishing methods to target species other than striped bass, for example, bluefish.
Yeah.
And they also said officers may not prioritize enforcement of certain fishery management plan regulations if they do not think it will be held up in court or is enforceable.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Or they're going to enforce it and see if people hold them accountable in court.
It sounds
Right,
like
which
it-
ultimately ends up being a burden on the system, right?
Right.
And that's,
Yeah.
I mean, we have a very stretched thin natural resources police in Maryland. They don't have the right funding. There's not enough folks on the water. I can't tell you how many anglers I talk to that never get checked. And they do at the hot spots.
Yeah.
Because the officers can do that effectively. It's difficult for officers to get on the water.
Right.
There's different policies in place to protect the officers. If two officers head out on a boat, you've got to have another team nearby just in case something happens.
Yeah.
You've got to have force overlap, and that's a key thing in law enforcement. So all these pieces of the puzzle make us very concerned about no targeting provisions, A, even being there because they're confusing to anglers,
Yeah.
and
B, are they quantifiable to save the fish?
I just think you're fooling yourself with the non-targeting because that's for the very reason why I love to fish. No matter, even if you are targeting fish, you can't guarantee that you have that species on the hook until you bring it up and get it out of the water.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
When I'm hunting, I have my
It's
sight.
different
Maybe your
story.
choice. Yep.
Yeah.
Right. I can say no. That's why there's antler restrictions.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's more of a that 16 days is catch and release. I mean, if you catch it, you just can't keep it.
Yeah,
And-
yeah. And I think the way the technical folks looked at it was, all right, we have an estimate of how many people targeted striped bass, and that's based on MRIP. So when you get surveyed, they say, what were you targeting? You can answer two different kinds of fish. So if you say, oh, I was targeting striped bass, that's what they write down. If you tell them, oh, striped bass and bluefish, that's what they write down. If you told them perch and catfish, that's not a targeted striped bass trip. So they went through all the data and tried to separate them and go, all right, how many likely striped bass trips are there? Are people going to repeat the activity that they already did again, or will that change? I think we all know that life changes by day.
Yeah.
So
You may not get a chance
You
to
may
get
not fish
out.
next
Yeah,
year.
yeah.
You never know.
Right.
So that's complicated, right? And that leads to the uncertainty. But ultimately, there's no way to guarantee you're not going to catch a rockfish in Maryland.
Right.
So
And-
I think they went, all right, maybe 80% of the targeted trips will still occur or not occur. I can't remember how they did it, but either way, it's kind of a stab in the dark.
Wow.
I would rather err on conservation and instead of having that targeted, have another few days, raise a slot.
Yep.
If you're truly out to get that biomass back to where you want it, let's put in things that will not that we think.
Yeah.
Because I'd rather you fix it in 2 years and we can get back to business as
So
usual.
that's a good point. So like how, what one of my biggest problems is you enact these rules and then do you ever go back? Like will there ever be catch and release season on the bay again in March or April? Like does that, how do you, eventually 5, 6, 7 years from
And
now,
then if
we're
you
going to
don't,
forget about that.
How do you control people then that, well, it's a slippery slope. We can't give them anything then.
Right. And that's constantly in these conversations. And so there is no exact answer unless they say this is our backstop. So like with the circle hook regulation, I mentioned a sunset.
Yeah.
There's not a sunset on this regulation, so we don't know when it's going to end.
Okay.
And that is partly because the state has to be compliant with the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. There's all these complexities. Quite often it's an argument. It's kind of a pointing of fingers or an excuse circle. But ultimately, we don't know.
Yeah.
And we don't know when it's going to come back. And that's one of the arguments we've made as well. We said, look, when you enact this, let's set the expectation in the angling community. And ultimately, one thing that can lead us to different regulations. So every single year, the state could present another plan to the commission, and the commission would review it. That's what we did with circle hooks.
Yeah.
So in the middle of stock assessments, the state said, you know what, 20 inches is not working. We're going to put circle hooks in place. Will you give us 19? There was a lot of debate. It ended up happening. Is it likely to happen again? I don't know. But there is a updated benchmark stock assessment being reported out in 2021. And so 2021, I think my best guess is that we may see new regulations by 2023, if that's the case. But I'm not 100% certain of that, and I don't know that anybody is yet. It's kind of, we have to wait and see. But ultimately, that 16-day closure in the summer, at some point through this process, Maryland DNR's made it known that we have really good water quality data in the Bay, or poor water quality.
Good data.
Knowing that it's bad, unfortunately.
We have high-quality data, low-quality water.
Yeah. Well, and so the whole point was, all right, let's try and stop this dead floating fish problem, this wasteful activity.
Yeah.
And many know that it happens early in July is kind of the peak of the bad weather, bad water. So in many of the proposals they had already put out there, the early July period was when they were going to close. And to me, that makes a lot more sense than late August. But on paper, all days in July and August are the same through the system because of those MRIP waves.
Yeah.
So I did have a talk with some Maryland officials yesterday after the meeting. I said, look, this August 16th to 31st, how'd you pick those? I don't know the answer. I can't even remember what they may have said, but I said, look, you all should look at overlapping that with the worst water quality. But we're going to have a mess on our hands this summer. And more dead fish.
Could be two shots of it, you know.
Yeah, more confusion. And ultimately, like has already been said, we want this to work.
Yeah.
You know, we want these fish back.
And I don't think anybody, I mean, you're obviously disappointed, and, you know, especially I fish catch and release almost exclusively anyway, you know, with the exception of trout from time to time. Most everything I catch,
you're still
I throw
9%, so don't be
exactly
dialing
maybe.
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 It could be
more,
1%. It could be 30%.
Yeah.
It's up to us.
There's a percentage there, and I don't. You know, the regulations are disappointing, but you understand why. You understand the intent. I know you don't have. You know, it's a science, but it's you know, in some cases you're taking a shot in the dark. So obviously we'd love, you know, 2-3 years from now to not be overfished and to not be in a state of overfishing. So
right.
Hopefully we see that bounce back.
So, you know, let me get this straight. Do we have definite regulations for 2020?
We're as close as we've been.
Right.
And so May 1st trophy season, 35-inch or greater fish in that one.
Okay. So if I buy my license for Maryland, am I going to get the book with 2020's regulations?
No, the book's printed.
That's going to be saying, like it did the other year, where it's please look it up on the website.
That's what it still says, I would imagine. It's actually here at the booth.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so
I do clearly remember that. I'm like, what?
Yeah. So the other pieces of the puzzle, the August closure. And then in order to so the August 16-day closure, they say accounts for 5.03% reduction.
Wow.
From May 16th to December 10th, which is our season for the summer, fall, under the new regulations. If you are on a charter boat, you'll get 2 fish. If you're fishing from the beach, a pier, on your own boat, by yourself as a private angler, you only get a 1 fish limit.
1 fish.
Okay.
18.
So no, 19.
19.
Okay. So 1 at 19 for the private anglers. Wow. There were various other ways to keep parity between the charter captains or the charter boat fish clients and private anglers.
Yeah.
But we lost that, which is, in our view, unfortunate. And just it's picking winners and losers. A big part of the decision-making process was charter captains saying we won't book trips unless we have a 2-fish limit.
Yeah.
And there's other ways to get at that, but ultimately, in the end, this is where DNRs come down, which essentially it creates, in my opinion, the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah.
It ignores the economic benefit that comes from all of us participating.
Right.
It prioritizes this charter captains, and not to criticize them. They're, you know, these are guys.
They went with that
careers.
with the bluefish limit though too. You know, charter's got 5.
Bluefish, private has 3.
Private got 3. So I mean, it seems to be a trend.
Yeah, and that's a slippery slope as well. It's unfortunately, if you really dig into the data, it's terribly imprecise. Mm-hmm. So we don't even have the resolution to do this and think it's actually the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it leads with the lack of trust. It kind of incites more of that lack of trust because you're sitting there going, what information do you have?
Yeah.
And I've been talking about people all day today about it, and they say, well, I'm okay with that. Other people go, how dare they do that? And so, you know, you're going to get a mixed review.
And you had said it before, science is facts, and then you have the management side, and that's when you introduce ego and emotion.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's unfortunately the bad part of involving people.
Yep.
And you can't get around that. And that's where you have to have good people on the board. I guess it all goes back to your vote, ultimately, and how you're voting. And you're voting for people who put responsible people on these boards or are in the game commissions or with whoever you can have for oversight that you, the person, get out and vote because it does. It trickles down to all these committees and there. Yeah. And you need to trust them because you have to have that trust. You have to have the trust in order for anything to work on both sides.
Yeah, yeah.
Both sides.
And there's a couple little pieces real quick because I know we're almost finished. All this will play out. There will be a regulatory scoping period, which is an opportunity for people to weigh in on public comment. We'll be continuing to make sure our members at CCA and the recreational fishing community does weigh in. There is something called the Sport Fish Advisory Commission to Maryland DNR. We meet quarterly. I've been on that since 2010.
Yeah.
We just created a brand new subcommittee. It's called the Tidal and Coastal Recreational Fishing Subcommittee. And this is another attempt at more transparency, more education, get people involved in this decision making. So we're sitting around the table realizing what we have to deal with and trying to work through it in a measured way and educate our community as much as possible and kind of become liaisons between the management agency and our community. So that's why CCA was created in the beginning.
Yeah.
You know, we're a watchdog in some ways. We provide a perspective. We represent folks. And you know, we're an important piece of the puzzle. And
sure. Absolutely.
Just one piece of it. So.
Yeah. Sure. Well, I appreciate what your organization does. I mean, and getting involved in things like this, it's got to. It seems like you've got one side of the coin that's, I don't want to say wants to protect every fish, and then you got another group that we want to take as many as possible. You guys are in the middle. I mean, it's really. We
it's
try and
about
find conservation.
Balance.
It's exactly what's in your name. So.
My number one goal is to make people informed. Later this month, I'll be teaching a fisheries education course, not teaching it, but participating in it, bringing stakeholders in. The federal government funds that. I mean, it's a constant. So the bottom line is fisheries management is a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
So we're in it for the long haul, and it's going to benefit all of us if we get this thing right. Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. There's definitely concern out there that these regs won't work, but we'll know quickly.
So where can people go to find out, if these things go through and are set in stone over the next month or two?
Yeah, so Maryland DNR's website's really the official place to find the information, right?
Okay.
CCA Maryland has a Facebook page, Coastal Conservation Association Maryland. We also have multiple chapter pages. We put out information there. Folks can sign up for our newsletter. You'll get our perspective.
Okay.
And they can do that right on the website. Anybody can reach me at david@ccamd.org. And ccamd.org is our website. I'm working on various blog posts and more information for folks. There's a ton of information out there. There's plenty of misinformation. We definitely have a perspective and an opinion, but we try and be clear about when it is an opinion versus fact.
Right.
And so anybody can reach out to me to better understand this stuff. And as you can tell, I'll talk about it for forever.
Well, I appreciate you really breaking this down because there's a lot to it.
Yeah.
And
it's
important.
Confusing. It's important.
Yeah. If you just come in and say, no more catch and release season, no more,
I
one
really
fish
appreciate
limit.
you backing up. Well, you kind of explained how the studies actually work.
What do you mean, kind of? He actually
but I mean,
put it out
I hope
there.
it made sense.
Yeah, it did make sense.
Well, I can accept it.
Yeah.
It's just not a man
Here it
behind
is.
the curtain and
Yes.
smoke and mirrors and then saying, poof, here's your numbers.
I've heard that the size of
Young of year.
Young of year study.
Yeah.
I've heard that term thrown around for years. I never knew how it was actually calculated.
I bet I could get you guys out with the team.
Let's do it. That'd be fun.
That would be,
That would be cool.
I'm going to check
Don't send Stevie. He'll be fishing.
I'm going to check my waders.
We can do that.
before we go.
Stevie and I will be throwing topwater in the corner. You guys can,
I'll
Bring
be
that
with you
net
guys
over
throwing
here.
the top water.
Not until
definitely.
May.
Well, and you guys did, after talking with you all last year, you did inspire us to start a podcast that did kind of fall off a little bit. It's called What's on the Line. We're bringing back some episodes soon.
Awesome.
And again, because these platforms are so important for our community.
Yeah.
You guys are doing an amazing job sitting around the Sonic Campfire, doing your thing. I spend tons of time on the road, and I've listened to every one of your episodes.
Thank you.
Cool.
Keep on doing it.
We appreciate it. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you for stopping by and breaking this down so everybody can understand it. Maybe the good folks here in Pennsylvania should thank you as well, because now maybe we might understand how they do things a little bit better as well.
Come on down and participate.
Amen.
All right.
Pick, where can people find us?
They can find us at RuttenRiverPursuits.com. They can go to all your social media outlets such as Facebook, Instagram, and the Twitters. Don't forget to look us up on YouTube's at Rutten River Pursuits Podcast. And as always, you can download and listen to all of our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio.
I love that iHeartRadio.
Me too. All right, guys.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Rig 'em weedless.
Get outdoors.
What they do is it's an index, so it's a comparison of year to year to year. How many small striped bass they're going to catch. I just went on this in the spring with the team.
You did?
Yep.
I bet that was pretty cool.
It was very cool. My waders leaked, but that's life.
That's why it was cool.
Yes, yes.
Makes for a long day.
This fisheries management is imprecise effort because it is so difficult.
Yeah.
And folks that are involved in it need to appreciate that. It's a very complicated thing, and you could stand there and argue all day long about it. Another way they commonly refer to it is like making sausage. Or scrapple, maybe.
Yeah.
It may taste good, but you probably don't want to see how it happens.
Know how it happens. Yeah.
Well, so there's actually here at the show. There's the DNR booth, the Fish and Hunt Maryland booth.
Yeah.
They're handing out sample circle hooks.
Okay.
It's an 8.0 laser sharp, non-offset Eagle Claw.
I wonder how many times you can go back.
Yeah,
well,
a couple times.
So it's one correlation in managing recreational catch is similar to like waterfowl. Yeah. They give us they survey the birds. Yep. They give us X number of days, and they know that you're not going to kill your 5 or 6 birds a day, whatever your limit is.
Right.
You're probably going to kill 1.2 birds a day or something like that, right? And so that all plays into how big of a calendar you get.
Right.
It's very similar.
I'd be thrilled with 1.2.
Yeah, he's like 0.02.
Oh, yeah. Maybe another 0 in there.
You still need a whole box of ammunition for that one.
That'll get you started.
That's where we don't talk about price per pound on duck breast to anybody.